The question of why there are no Targaryens named Rhaenyra after the infamous Dance of the Dragons is one of those fascinating historical puzzles in the world of Westeros, and it speaks volumes about how history is written by the victors, or in this case, the survivors. The core reason is that the name became forever linked to a disastrous, bloody civil war and the ultimate defeat of the claimant, which made it a kind of taboo, a dark omen that no future king or prince wanted to invite back into the family line. To truly understand this, we need to go back and look at the whole story, not just the ending, because Rhaenyra was initially celebrated. When she was born, she was called the Realm's Delight, a beautiful and fiery princess, the only child of King Viserys the First and his first wife, Queen Aemma Arryn, to survive infancy. Viserys loved her fiercely, and after Queen Aemma's death and the brief life of his son Baelon, he made the unprecedented decision to name Rhaenyra as his heir to the Iron Throne. This is the moment in history where the clock started ticking toward the tragedy of the Dance of the Dragons. In the House of the Dragon show, we see Viserys make his lords swear an oath to Rhaenyra, accepting her as the future queen. This includes lords like Otto Hightower and Lord Corlys Velaryon. Rhaenyra spent years as the proclaimed Princess of Dragonstone, training for a role that Westerosi tradition had always denied a woman. This is where the controversy begins to slowly poison her reputation. The lords of Westeros, even those who took the oath, were overwhelmingly traditionalists. They fundamentally believed that a woman could not, and should not, sit on the Iron Throne. This sexism was cemented less than a generation before at the Great Council of 101 AC, which passed over Rhaenys Targaryen, Viserys' cousin, in favor of Viserys himself, just because she was a woman. That decision established a precedent that the lords saw as a law, and Rhaenyra was defying it simply by existing as the heir. When Viserys married Alicent Hightower and had a healthy son, Aegon, the traditionalists suddenly had a male alternative. The court split into two factions, the Blacks, who supported Rhaenyra's claim, and the Greens, who supported her younger half-brother Aegon. Even while Viserys lived, this growing tension created an atmosphere of deep distrust and rivalry, especially after the true parentage of Rhaenyra's first three sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, became an open secret at court. While Rhaenyra's first husband was Lena Velaryon, her sons clearly looked like their rumored biological father, Sir Harwin Strong. In a dynasty where blood purity and legitimacy were everything, this blatant display was a massive vulnerability that the Greens exploited to call her character and her children's claims into question. When King Viserys finally died, the Greens, led by Alicent and Otto, completely ignored Viserys' will, which reaffirmed Rhaenyra as his heir. They crowned Aegon as King Aegon II in King's Landing. This act of usurpation is the spark that fully ignites the Dance of the Dragons. Rhaenyra, who had been on Dragonstone, was crowned in turn by her supporters, proclaiming herself Queen Rhaenyra the First. What happens next is a devastating civil war where the Targaryen house turns its full might on itself. Dragon fights dragon, brother fights brother. This is the central event that irrevocably taints Rhaenyra's name in the historical record. The war was brutal, culminating in her eventual capture and execution by her half-brother, Aegon II, who had his dragon's sunfire burn and eat her right in front of her youngest surviving son, Aegon the Younger. She became known as the half-year queen because her reign, though she was crowned, was so short and contested. The crucial point here is that for a Targaryen name to be reused, it usually needs to belong to someone who was either a great, universally celebrated king like Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, or one of the great foundational figures like Aegon the Conqueror or his sister-wife Rhaenys. The names are meant to invoke power, wisdom, or victory. Rhaenyra's legacy, unfortunately, became the opposite of all those things. She was associated with the ultimate failure of the Targaryen dynasty, a civil war that nearly destroyed the entire family and led directly to the death of almost all the dragons, which were the very source of their power. Let us look at her historical reputation from the perspective of the maesters who wrote the history, specifically the work Fire and Blood. The maesters, who were often aligned with the ruling king and the patriarchal traditions of Westeros, naturally wrote a history that was not kind to her. They highlighted her flaws, her stubbornness, her poor judgment after the death of her son Lucerys, and the fact that her short reign in King's Landing was a disaster. She lost the support of the small folk by raising taxes and being perceived as cruel, earning her nicknames like Maega with Teats and the Whore of Dragonstone. History branded her as the one who brought ruin. Even though her son, Aegon III, eventually took the throne and ended the dance, and her other son, Viserys II, also became a king, they did not choose to immortalize her name. Aegon III was crowned king, having defeated and replaced his uncle, Aegon II. However, the history books still viewed his rise as a compromise for peace, not as the vindication of Rhaenyra's rightful claim. Aegon III, known as Aegon the Dragonbane because the last of the dragons died during his reign, was known to be a deeply melancholy, heartbroken king who never fully recovered from watching his mother die. While he undoubtedly loved his mother, naming his children Rhaenyra would have been a profoundly political act that would remind everyone of the recent, horrible war. Aegon III, and later his brother Viserys II, were focused on healing the realm and restoring stability. Choosing a name so heavily associated with war, rebellion, and deep division would have been seen as deliberately provocative and threatening to the fragile peace. They avoided names associated with both sides of the dance. They used names like Aegon, Viserys, Daeron, and Baelor, names that recalled a more peaceful or revered past. It is also important to consider the other names that disappeared from the Targaryen line. Another prominent name that vanished was Visenya, Aegon the Conqueror's sister-wife. Visenya's name was tainted because her son was Maegor the Cruel, arguably the most reviled king in Targaryen history. So if a name is associated with a terrible war, a monstrous king, or a failed claimant, the family tends to retire it. In the case of Rhaenyra, she fits into that category of a failed, or at least a highly controversial claimant. She may have been the rightful heir by her father's decree, and modern viewers of House of the Dragon may sympathize with her, but the Westerosi historians of the time remembered her as a symbol of the end of the Age of Dragons. Her ambition, her claim, and her war brought the entire dynasty to its knees. See this pattern continue. Even the name Daemon, Rhaenyra's famously controversial husband, the Rogue Prince, is used sparingly by the mainline Targaryens after the dance, likely for similar reasons. Another example is the name Maegor, which was never used again because of Maegor the Cruel's atrocities. Even the name Aegon itself, despite being the conqueror's name, became complicated, given that both sides had an Aegon during the dance, but it was too foundational to eliminate entirely. The name Rhaenyra, which means Queen of the Valyrians in a rough interpretation of the High Valyrian root, was supposed to be a name of power and destiny. Instead, it became a cautionary tale. The subsequent Targaryen kings wanted their own children to be seen as uniting figures, future leaders who would not pick up the old grievances. They chose names that signaled a return to tradition, peace, and the glory days before the dance. Therefore, the absence of a Targaryen named Rhaenyra is not a simple oversight or an accident of history. It is a deliberate, unspoken condemnation passed down through the generations. It is a reflection of the profound damage done by the Dance of the Dragons, a war so destructive that the surviving Targaryens wanted to forget the names of those who were seen as the instigators, ensuring that the legacy of the half-year queen would never again be placed upon the head of a living princess, lest she inherit her namesake's tragic fate. The lack of a new Rhaenyra is a monument to the war that almost ended the entire house. If you were a king or queen looking down the line of history, knowing that naming a child Rhaenyra essentially guarantees a civil war, would you still risk giving your child that name? Let me know what you think. Was the name Rhaenyra doomed from the moment King Viserys the First broke tradition, or was it the war itself that permanently cursed the name? Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more, and I will see you in my next video.